We're going.
Hi everyone, welcome to Chef TV. I'd like to welcome everyone for tuning in to tonight's show. Tonight we're going to talk about knife skills, and we're going to show you some different types of knives, and we're going to show you how to cut different types of vegetables tonight. So let's get started. So what we have here is a different selection of knives. What we have is a chef's knife, which is for general purpose cutting, slicing, dicing, chopping. You can open cans with it if you need to. It's basically the knife I use almost all the time. The next knife I have in my collection here is a paring knife, which is used for small work. You want to cut up some garlic, you want to cut up shallot, cut the end of a tomato off. That's basically the second most used knife in my collection. My third knife is a fillet knife. I use this primarily for butchering fish. We're not going to use that one tonight because we're just doing vegetables, but in another show we'll show you how to fillet a fish. This knife has a very flexible blade, that enables you to get close to the bones of a fish and pull as much meat off of the skeleton as possible. The next knife we have is a boning knife. And what this is for butchering. If you want to butcher a leg of lamb, a pork shoulder, you can use your chef's knife for this as well. It's a pretty specialized knife, and I use this once in a while. The next knife I have is probably, I would say probably my second or third most used knife. It's a Santoku knife, and it's very good for making fast work of vegetables. It has a nice thin edge to it, and it does a great job cutting through vegetables. The next knife we have is a bread knife. Has a serrated edge, as you can see here. I use this pretty much every weekend if I make French toast, if I want to cut a sandwich. The blade is, you can get these resharpened. Generally, they don't go dull very quick, and when they do, I generally just throw them away and buy a new one. The last piece in my collection is a steel. And it's an important piece in your knife set because what it does, the way the knife edge works is if you could put this under a microscope, what that steel will do is you run it over the steel, very often as you use your knife a lot, the edge will get curled over. And what the steel will do is straighten that up. It's not, very often people think this is for sharpening a knife. What this does is straightens the edge on the knife and keeps your knife what would appear to be sharper, but it's just straightening up the edge. To use this, you basically just hold it in your left hand or your right hand, depending upon which way you would like to do it, and just run it right down, just from top to bottom, like so.
What kind of angle are you using there?
Well, essentially, what happens with that, you want to use the same angle as you sharpen it with. And we're going to talk about sharpening blades in another show. You want to keep, as I was taught in school, basically a penny. If you could keep a penny between the steel and the knife itself, just as if you were sharpening it on a stone, that's the angle that you're looking for. All right? So let's talk about the knife for a moment. The components of a knife are the tip, the edge, the handle, the bolster, and the heel. And all of them have their different places as far as the knife is concerned. Your handle is something that you want to have a comfortable grip. Your knife should be balanced. You should be able to take your knife and put it on your finger, and it should balance nice and even like so. The heel, essentially, if you want to look for something like you're going to open up a coconut, or if you wanted to open up if you were in a pinch, like in the woods or something, and you want to open up a can of beans, you could use your heel of the knife for that. The tip, very often you're going to put that down if you're looking to open up a package or something. And obviously the edge is where you're going to do primarily most of your work. So why don't we...
We've got a question coming in
Yes.
from Chatham. How much should you spend on a knife?
Well, what I have basically, as far as brands of knives go, I have a couple different here. This is a Mercer knife. It's made in Germany. These are all carbon steel knives. None of these were expensive. They're all good quality knives. To answer your question, you can spend as little or as much as you like. I would go with the middle of the road, Henkel's, Wusthof, Mercer, refined, Global, which is a step up to Japanese knife. It requires a special sharpening technique because they're left or right-handed in terms of what their blade, the sharpening is. So you spend what you like. You don't have to spend a whole lot of money to get a really good knife. is what I'm saying. So why don't we chop some vegetables? Let me clear this stuff off of here.
I got another question coming in. If you had to buy one knife, which knife would you buy?
A chef's knife.
And why is that?
Because it's most versatile, and it's the knife that you can do anything with. Take it anywhere, you can do anything you want with it. As I'll show you here, we'll get started with, let's do an onion first. Basic cutting technique for the knife is, as I showed you earlier, if you hold the knife in your finger and it's balanced, you basically just want to take your thumb and your finger together like so, and just wrap it around the handle so you have a nice comfortable grip on it. The other technique that you really want to pay attention to is that bear claw. And the bear claw is where you're going to grab your vegetable or whatever your work is going to be and put your hands on it and move your knuckles forward, because you're going to want to slide that knife blade right across your knuckles so you don't cut yourself. So there's a couple different techniques. One is put the tip, as we talked about the different parts of the knife earlier, put the tip on your work surface and just in a sawing motion, just make nice cuts like so. Now, sometimes you'll find, if you're working with a piece of onion like this where it's kind of tall, you can actually take the knife, and it's okay to do, and just raise it up, not using that rocking motion, but just this nice sawing motion, again, the bear claw, and just cut through, like so. Now, we would use a cut like this in a salad. We would use this for caramelizing onions, whatever your recipe might call for. Very often, what we'll do is we'll cut these into smaller pieces, and as our work is now closer to its surface, you can actually take the knife and use that sawing motion, like so. You just want to use that sawing motion. You're not actually chopping your vegetables. You don't want to crush your vegetables, and you want to try and keep your cuts as uniform as possible so that when you cook, everything cooks evenly. All right, so let's clean this up real quick here. My bowl.
Are you chopping through the vegetable, or are you slicing through the vegetable?
You're slicing. It's a sawing motion. We don't really want to chop through anything because it's going to crush the vegetable. I'll use, for this one, I use that Sansuko knife that I talked about before. It's a very good knife for dicing and slicing. You can take, as you can see, it runs right through your work very quickly. Now, if you want it to dice, what you want to do is keep your work at a 45, like this. Keep it here. Run it through from the heel to the tip, heel to the tip, heel to the tip. We're not so interested today, the show isn't so much about chopping vegetables as it is about the technique. And we can go through some techniques for cutting the vegetables as well. In this case, I've decided to use like a half-inch dice on this particular onion. So, all right. Take care of that. All right. So why don't we?
We have a question from Ed from Tinton Falls. What's the best way to clean knives?
Clean your knife with, in your sink, you take your sponge, you grab one of the knives I'm looking at, cut with here, and with the blade out, you basically just want to take your sponge, like so, and just wipe it, soap in water, straight across, keep the blade away from you, then wash the handle and let it air dry. Simple as that. All right, let's use our paring knife. This is an instance where, I'll give you two examples here. Now we have a tomato. So what you want to do is take your paring knife like so, thumb, forefinger, at about an inch depth, and just run it right into your tomato. Now I'm holding this in my hand. If you're not comfortable with this, you can put it on your work surface, and just with the sawing motion, lay your piece like so. That'll help you pit your, well, not pit, that's going to take the stem out of the tomato. The other thing you can do with this if you want, now I like to use a chef's knife on garlic myself, but a lot of people are uncomfortable with that because the piece is so small. So what you would do is the same, the bear claw grip, just make little slices like so. As you can see, it makes nice little cuts. The paring knife is a nice knife, very utilitarian type knife in the kitchen to have. All right, so why don't we cut up a celery? Use our chef's knife for this. Now, different recipes are going to call for different size cuts. So, however you want to make your cuts, you're going to make it for a stew, you're going to have mirepoix. Let's say it calls for a 1-inch cut. Just want to set your finger on the piece, like so, and just run through. Again, you just want to have that tip to heel motion. Now, if you had a recipe that called for strips, let's say, what I would do with this is to turn the celery over and just run your knife. See, 1/4-inch strips. Just make little cuts like this. Turn your piece over, and then if you had to have strips, let's say it was 2-inch strips, like so. If you wanted to dice, just put your pieces together, a nice little pile, and run your knife through. And then you've got dices. And again, you always want to keep your knife in that rocking motion and keep all your pieces as uniform as possible. We're going to do a pepper next, and I'll use the Santuco knife for that because it's my favorite knife for chopping up some vegetables. So we'll start with cutting off the end. You place the pepper on its bottom like that you cut off, and just run the knife through. Your knife should run very cleanly right through all your work. Shouldn't have any chopping, basically any crunching noises or something that you really want to try and avoid with your knife.
I have a question for the stomach. What happens if your knife gets really blunt?
Well, as we spoke of earlier, there's several different ways to sharpen a knife. I have a little cheater that I use, that I got from Westhoff, that I run through the knife through almost on a daily basis. Let me give this a quick clean here. Just want to run it from the heel to the tip, from the heel to the tip. It's got two settings on it, coarse and fine. I don't use the coarse setting on it. It seems to destroy the knife, literally. The fine setting is good for a daily use to keep the blade nice and sharp. After that, I would steel it, clean the knife off, and go ahead and chop. Once your knife is dull, and we haven't talked about sharpening our knives, that'll be for a whole other episode. You can have them sharpened professionally, or you can buy a stone, and there's different methods for sharpening, and we can go over that at a later time. But if your knives are really dull, you're not comfortable with sharpening yourself, then I would just send them out and have them done. It's very cheap. It's a couple dollars a knife to have your knife sharp. And there's really nothing worse than a dull knife because it requires you to use more pressure on your work, and if you cut yourself, you're going to get a real bad cut. So let's slice up some peppers. A couple different ways. We have some videos on our site that show you how to slice and dice peppers. You can do it skin side down, skin side up, whatever's comfortable. This piece of pepper actually is falling out nicely with the skin side up. And if your knife is sharp, it really wouldn't matter what side you use. So you're looking for strips, like so. Now, if you want, if your piece is too big to work with, just cut it in half. Like that. If you're looking for some dices on your pepper, you see it's very effortless as the knife runs through the work. Right. All right, so for our last piece, we're going to do a carrot. Now, carrots tend to be a little tricky to cut, and with the knife that I recommend is a heavier knife like this. A chef's knife with the heavy back on it is more adept at cutting through something that's harder, like your root vegetables. Potatoes, carrots, butternut squash. I like to use a nice heavy chef's knife for this rather than the Santuco knife, just for the simple fact that it's heavier and it just seems to give you a little more oomph for your pieces. So let's say you're making a stew. So you want to make some pieces for your mirepoix, for your sauce to get started. You're going to cut these like so. Now, as you notice, carrot's round. If you're looking to cut some strips or dices out of it, what you want to do with your piece is just to cut a piece off like this, roll it over to that cut side. Now you have a nice stable work surface to work with.
What other vegetables can you use that technique with?
You can use that with potatoes, a lot of your squashes, zucchinis, butternut squash, anything that's round. That's a harder vegetable. Obviously, onions you cut in half to work with. So as you cut it in half, it automatically creates that natural flat work surface for you.
And I got a question from Fairhaven. Is it wise to use kitchen shears to cut vegetables?
Chives only. Chives only. And hair.
Okay.
All right. So let's say you want to do some matchsticks. You have a salad. You want to make a nice salad for your honey. So again, just run that tip in like so, and you have your pieces to work with now, nice and flat. So you can stack these. Once you get more comfortable with your skills, you can stack these pieces up. Or if you're not, then you just do them singular. It's not a rush, not a contest. So you want to make little matchsticks, or julienne, as they say. And these are large pieces. We basically, at this point, would cut these into a dice, a 1/4-inch dice. And you hear the noise. It's not making much noise as the knife goes through our vegetables.
Another question from Kenton Paul. Talk to us about cutting boards. Which is better, wood or plastic?
I like both. Plastics, both sanitize easily. I mean, it's always, you're always taught if you use one of your boards for your meats, your poultry, your beef, that's all you should use it for. It's not necessarily true. I mean, if you can throw a plastic board in a dishwasher, it becomes sanitized. You can buy Clorox sanitizer. I love both boards. I mean, I love the plastic board. It's versatile, lasts a long time, and a wood cutting board is just as nice as well. You spend a lot of money for a wood cutting board, like a booze block, but it's worth every penny.
And then how do you stop your board from moving around?
That's a good question. Well, I clear my board off. All my veggies. 2 seconds. All right, so I use a bread scraper to pick up all my vegetables, and if I'm making bread or doughs or pastry dough, very handy tool to have. So what I have here, as I lift this board up, is a wet paper towel. So what you want to do, because this is a big board, I double it up. This is 2 layers of paper towel. I ran under the sink, rinsed it under the sink, wrung it out, and then just laid it out on the countertop. And put your cutting board on top of it, and voila, clean work surface. So that basically wraps up our intro to knife skills. I hope you found tonight's lesson instructional and helpful. I'm Chef Phil from Chef TV, and we appreciate you tuning in. Have a good night.